The night on planet Vera 9 was cold and lonely, filled with the sound of metal wind hitting empty buildings. A human engineer named Mark sat outside his small workshop, wiping the oil from his hands after fixing mining drones all day. He looked tired, his eyes half closed, his back stiff from endless work. The settlement lights in the distance flickered weakly under the dusty sky. Everyone else had gone home, but Mark stayed, repairing old machines to earn enough credits for food and rent. He sighed deeply and leaned against his chair, staring at the strange moons above. His thoughts drifted to Earth, the place he hadn't seen in years. He wondered if anyone there still remembered him. The desert around his shop was silent, until a small, gentle voice broke through the stillness. "You look tired, sir." Mark jumped, almost dropping his wrench. He turned quickly, scanning the shadows near the door. No one was supposed to be here at this hour. Then he saw her, a little alien girl stood a few steps away, barefoot on the dusty ground. She had soft blue skin that shimmered under the pale light. Her big silver eyes were calm, but filled with sadness. She wore torn clothes, and in her hands, she held a broken toy sphere glowing faintly from inside. Mark blinked, thinking his tired eyes were playing tricks. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" he asked, his voice rough from long hours of silence. The girl looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." She hugged her toy close to her chest. "I was just passing by, sir." "I saw the light in your window." Mark frowned, standing up slowly. "Passing by?" "Kid, this area's empty for 10 miles. Where are your parents?" The girl didn't answer. She only looked behind her nervously as if afraid of something unseen. The wind carried a faint humming sound from the far valley. Mark noticed it and turned his head. It sounded mechanical, like engines far away but getting closer. The girl's eyes widened with fear. "They're coming," she whispered. Mark's chest tightened. "Who's coming?" She shook her head quickly. "Please hide me. They'll find me if I stay outside." Mark hesitated, his human instincts fighting his sense of caution. He didn't know this girl, and he had already seen too much trouble in his life. Still, something in her trembling voice made him open the door. "Come inside," he said softly. The girl stepped in, clutching her toy tightly. Mark locked the door behind them and switched off the outside lights. Inside, the workshop was warm and messy, filled with wires, old screens, and spare parts. The girl looked around with curiosity, her eyes glowing slightly in the dim light. Mark handed her a piece of bread and a bottle of water. "Here, eat. You look half-starved." She nodded politely, whispering, "Thank you, sir." As she ate slowly, Mark sat across from her, trying to make sense of everything. "You got a name?" he asked. She nodded. "Lyra." "That's a nice name," he said carefully. "So, Lyra, who's looking for you?" Lyra's small fingers gripped the edge of the table. "Men. They took me and other children," she said softly. "They did tests. They said I'm different." Mark frowned. "Tests? What kind of tests?" She looked up, her silver eyes glowing faintly. "They said my blood can control the old machines, the ones from before humans came here." Mark stared at her, unsure if this was just a child's imagination or something far bigger. Suddenly, the workshop lights flickered and the power console sparked. Mark ran to the panel, muttering, "Not again." But before he could touch it, Lyra's toy sphere glowed. Bright blue, and the power stabilized. Mark turned in shock. "How did you—" Lyra hugged the toy close and said quietly, "I didn't mean to. It just happens when I get scared." Before Mark could ask another question, the faint hum from outside grew louder. This time, he could see lights moving across the dark sand, search beams sweeping the area. Lyra ran to the window, her face pale. "They found me," she whispered, trembling. Mark looked through the crack in the wall and saw armored figures stepping out of hovering crafts. They moved like soldiers, scanning the ground with glowing visors. One of them shouted through a device that subject Lyra escaped containment. Locate and retrieve immediately. Mark's blood ran cold. He turned to Lyra, who looked up at him with frightened eyes. Please don't let them take me, she whispered. They'll hurt me again. Mark stared at her, torn between fear and pity. Outside, the soldiers' footsteps grew closer. Inside, the lights dimmed and the hum of machines echoed softly like a heartbeat. Mark made his choice. He walked to the power switch and turned everything off, plunging the workshop into darkness, he whispered. Stay quiet. The little alien girl nodded and hid behind the workbench. Through the window, Mark saw shadows moving outside his door. Someone knocked, slow and heavy. Open up, human, a voice called, deep and cold. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He stayed still, his hand hovering near his wrench. Outside, the voice repeated, We know she's here, and at that moment Mark realized his quiet life on Vera 9 was over forever. The heavy knocks faded slowly, leaving only silence and the soft buzz of the wind. Mark stood frozen, listening carefully, his breath short and heavy. He waited, for footsteps, for another sound, but none came. After a long minute, he moved quietly to the window and peeked outside. The soldiers were gone. Only their footprints glowed faintly in the sand under the moonlight. He turned back to the room, where the little alien girl, Lyra, still hid behind the workbench. Her glowing silver eyes peered out, full of fear and innocence. It's okay, Mark whispered. They're gone, for now. Lyra stood up slowly, still clutching her broken toy sphere. Her voice trembled. They will come back, sir. They always come back. Mark sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. He didn't want trouble, not again, not after years of trying to stay invisible. But something about this girl, her calm voice, her glowing eyes, made him feel responsible. Sit down, he said softly, pulling out a chair. Tell me what's going on. Who are those people? Lyra hesitated, staring at the floor for a moment, then said quietly, They work for the facility beyond the ridge. They call it Sector 9. Mark frowned. That place is supposed to be abandoned. It's not, she whispered. It's where they keep children like me. Mark felt a chill run through him. Children like you? What do you mean? Lyra looked up slowly, her eyes glowing faintly like liquid silver. They take children with special genes. They say our bodies can connect with the old technology buried on this planet. Mark leaned forward, trying to understand. What kind of technology? She pointed to her toy sphere. Things like this, machines from before humans came here. Mark took the sphere gently from her hands, turning it over under the lamplight. It was smooth and cold, covered in tiny symbols he didn't recognize. He pressed one symbol by accident, and a faint hum filled the room. The air shimmered for a second, and the lamp beside him flickered to life without power. Mark dropped the sphere in surprise. What in the world? Lyra picked it up quickly, her small hands trembling. I'm sorry, sir. It reacts to my heartbeat. I can't control it. Mark stared at her, now understanding why the soldiers called her subject. He took a deep breath. So, they're after you because of this? Because you can power old machines? She nodded slowly, tears forming in her glowing eyes. They said I'm dangerous, that I must be studied. Her voice broke. They said I'm not even real. Mark looked at her quietly, the memory of his own past pain returning. Years ago, he was part of a human colony project that failed, leaving hundreds dead. He had been blamed for a reactor malfunction that wasn't his fault. He knew how it felt to be treated like a problem instead of a person. You're real enough, he said softly. And you don't deserve this. Lyra blinked, surprised by his kindness. No one ever said that to me before, she whispered. Mark smiled faintly. Then I'm the first. He stood up and looked out the window again. The night sky was calm now. But in the distance, faint red lights blinked like eyes. He knew they didn't have much time. Do they have trackers on you? He asked. She shook her head. They did, but I removed it. Good girl, he said. Then maybe we can get you out of here." "Out?" she repeated softly. "Yes. There's an old tunnel system through the desert, left from the first settlers. It leads to the northern range. If we can reach there, they can't track us easily." Lyra hesitated. "You'd help me?" Mark looked at her seriously. "I don't leave kids to die. Not human, not alien." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind outside. Then Lyra whispered, "Thank you, sir." Mark nodded and began packing a small bag, food, water, and his old energy pistol. As he worked, he heard Lyra humming softly, the same tune that echoed faintly from her toy sphere. It was strange but peaceful, like the sound of stars whispering. Suddenly, the ground beneath them vibrated. Mark froze, listening. Outside, a bright light swept across the valley, cutting through the sandstorm. Lyra's eyes widened. "They're back." Mark grabbed his bag and looked around. "Back door now," he ordered. They ran out through the storage hatch behind the workshop. The night air was sharp and cold. Over their heads, drones buzzed like mechanical bees, scanning the ground with white light. Mark pulled Lyra under an old metal truck. The hum of engines grew louder, closer. Lyra clutched her toy tightly, whispering, "I can stop them if I use the power." Mark shook his head. "No. If you do, they'll know exactly where we are. We stay quiet." The light passed over them slowly, then drifted away. When it was gone, Mark let out the breath he had been holding. He turned to Lyra, whispering, "We need to move before sunrise." She nodded, her little face set with determination beyond her age. Mark looked at her and realized something strange. This wasn't just a scared child anymore. There was something ancient in her eyes, something powerful yet kind. He didn't understand it yet, but deep down, he knew this girl wasn't just running from danger. She was running toward a destiny far greater than either of them imagined. The first light of dawn touched the desert horizon, painting the metal sands in shades of golden gray. Mark stood beside his old cargo truck, loading supplies as fast as he could. The air smelled of heat and dust. Mixed with the faint burn of old fuel, Lyra sat inside the cabin, hugging her glowing toy sphere close, her small fingers trembling slightly. Mark checked the sky every few seconds, his eyes sharp and tired. He could feel it in his gut. Those soldiers weren't far behind, they always came back, and this time, they would bring heavier machines. "Ready?" he asked, climbing into the driver's seat. Lyra nodded quietly, her silver eyes watching him carefully. The truck's old engine coughed before roaring to life. "Hang on," Mark said. Pushing the accelerator, the wheels spun, throwing sand behind them as they drove away from the workshop. In the distance, the sky glowed faint red, not from sunrise, but from the search ships. They drove for hours through endless dunes, the world around them silent and dry. Lyra spoke softly. "You're not scared, sir?" Mark gave a tired smile. "Oh, I'm scared, kid. But being scared means you've still got something worth protecting." Lyra looked at him curiously. "Were you always like this?" He laughed a little. "No. Once I was someone who trusted the system. Big mistake." She tilted her head. "What happened?" Mark's smile faded, his voice turning quiet. "Let's just say I tried to help people, and the people in power didn't like that." For a moment, silence filled the cabin, only the hum of the engine echoing. Then Lyra said softly, "You remind me of my father." Mark blinked, surprised. "Your father?" She nodded. "He used to work with machines too. He said machines are like people. They need care, not orders." Mark smiled faintly. "Smart man." Her voice softened. "He tried to protect me when they came. They took him away." The truck hit a small bump and Lyra's voice faded. Mark glanced at her, his chest tightening. He wanted to say something comforting, but words felt too small for pain like that. After a long silence, Mark said, "We'll make it to the ridge before nightfall. Once we cross, they can't track us easily." Lyra nodded, staring out at the desert, but as the sun climbed higher, the engine began to stutter. Mark frowned, hitting the dashboard. No, not now." The truck slowed, coughing smoke, then stopped completely. He jumped out, lifting the hood, heat hitting his face instantly. "Burned valve line," he muttered. "Great." Lyra climbed out quietly, holding her toy. She placed her hand on the metal and whispered, "Can I help?" Mark blinked. "You, how?" Before he could stop her, the sphere in her hand glowed, sending tiny threads of light into the engine. The air shimmered, and the engine hummed to life. Smoother than before, Mark stared in disbelief. You just fixed it without touching anything. Lyra looked up with shy pride. I told you. It listens to me. Mark shook his head, half amazed, half scared. You're a miracle, kid. But that miracle is what they want to catch. As he got back in, a sharp beeping echoed from the radio panel. An emergency frequency. Mark's eyes widened. They've jammed the comms. He looked up at the sky, and his heart sank. 3 small black dots were moving fast toward them, growing larger with every second. Drones, he muttered, slamming the accelerator. The truck roared forward, sand flying in every direction. The first drone fired a scanning beam that hit the rear window. Lyra screamed as the glass cracked. Mark swerved sharply, shouting, "Hold on!" A second beam shot down, cutting through the sand beside them. The explosion shook the truck, flipping loose cargo into the air. Mark gritted his teeth. They're trying to disable us. Not kill us, Lyra's voice shook. Why not kill us? Because they need you alive, he shouted over the roar. He turned sharply toward the canyon path. Narrow and full of sharp rocks, the drones followed, their metallic wings slicing through the air. One drone fired a net-like projectile that wrapped around the truck's rear wheel. The tires screeched as the truck lost control and flipped sideways into the sand. Mark hit the ground hard, his head spinning. Everything went blurry for a moment, heat, dust, silence. Then he heard it, Lyra's frightened cry, "Mark! Mark!" He tried to move, pain shooting through his arm. He saw her small figure running toward him, but before she reached him, a shadow fell over her. A drone descended low. Mechanical arms extending, it grabbed her by the shoulder, lifting her into the air. "Lyra!" Mark shouted, dragging himself forward. She screamed, "Let me go!" Her toy sphere glowed bright white, and the drone sparked violently, dropping her to the ground. But more shadows appeared, 2 larger ships landing nearby, soldiers jumping out with weapons ready. Mark crawled behind a rock, gripping his pistol, his heart pounding. He aimed, but his hand trembled. The soldiers surrounded Lyra, their leader shouting, "Subject located. Prepare for transport." Lyra looked terrified, but then saw Mark across the sand. Their eyes met, and she shook her head slowly. "Don't," she whispered. Even though he couldn't hear her, Mark fired anyway. The bullet striking a soldier's armor but doing little damage. Energy blasts lit up the desert, forcing him to duck by the time he looked up again. The soldiers were gone, only footprints and dust remained. Lyra was gone too. Mark fell to his knees. Clutching his side, his truck burned in the background, flames rising into the dark sky. He looked up at the glowing ships vanishing into the horizon. His voice broke. "I'm coming for you, kid, no matter where they take you." And with that promise, a human heart began a war he never planned to fight. The desert night was quiet again. But Mark's world was broken. His hands shook as he stared at the empty sand where the ships had taken off. Smoke rose from the wrecked truck behind him, painting the sky black. Lyra was gone, and the silence around him felt colder than the wind itself. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stand. Even though every part of him hurt, his left arm was bleeding, his leg scraped from the crash, but he didn't care. He had made a promise. And now that promise burned in his chest like fire. He whispered to himself, "I'm coming for you, kid," and started walking. The sand stretched endlessly, but Mark kept moving. Following the faint glow in the sky, he remembered the symbols Lyra showed him on her toy sphere, the same ones from old alien ruins. She once said the soldiers wanted to use her to activate something ancient, something buried. Now he understood. They hadn't just taken her to punish her. They needed her for something far more dangerous. Hours passed, his steps slow but steady. By dawn, he reached a rocky ridge covered with strange markings. Symbols glowed faintly under the sand, like veins of light running through stone. It wasn't just a desert, it was hiding something alive, something old, at the top of the ridge. He saw it, a huge entrance half buried in sand and metal. It looked like a temple or a forgotten machine, silent for centuries. Mark crouched behind a rock and watched from afar. Dozens of soldiers surrounded the entrance. Their black suits shimmered under the sun, weapons glowing red, and among them he saw Lyra. She was inside a glass pod, wires connected to her small arms. Her eyes were closed and she wasn't moving. Mark's fists clenched. He could see the man leading them, the same one who had spoken outside his workshop. Tall, cold-faced, wearing a gray coat over his armor. The man was barking orders. Prepare the chamber. She must be connected before activation. Mark's stomach turned. They were going to use her as a key. He crept closer, staying low among the rocks. Every movement had to be silent. He watched as they lowered Lyra's pod into the glowing chamber inside the ruins. A huge machine stood there, part crystal, part metal, shaped like a heart with energy pulsing through it. Strange alien text floated in the air. Reacting to her presence, one soldier said nervously, "Sir?" "The readings are unstable." The leader smiled coldly. "Good. That means she's the right one." Mark's anger boiled inside him. He picked up a metal rod, gripping it tight. His mind screamed that it was impossible. One man against an army, but his heart didn't care. He moved quietly through the shadows until he reached the outer wall of the ruins. Inside, blue light danced across the floor, painting everything in ghostly color. He saw Lyra again, her small hands twitching as the machine pulsed. She was awake now, whispering weakly, "Mark." The leader turned sharply. "She's conscious. Increase the containment field." Lyra screamed as electricity crackled around her. Mark couldn't wait any longer. He ran forward with a shout, swinging the metal rod at the nearest guard. The man fell and alarms blared instantly. Energy blasts filled the air, hitting the walls and rocks. Mark rolled to cover, firing his old pistol wildly. He hit 2 guards, dodged another, then rushed toward the pod. "Lyra," he shouted. She opened her eyes, weak but glowing bright. "Mark, go!" "You'll die," she cried. "Not without you," he shouted back, smashing the control panel beside her. The machine went wild, lights flashing, energy crackling. The leader turned his weapon toward Mark. "You foolish human," he said coldly. "You've doomed us all." Mark fired. Hitting the man's shoulder, the leader fell back, but his hand slammed another control button. The huge relic behind Lyra began to pulse faster, louder, like a beating heart ready to explode. Lyra's pod shattered. Energy pouring out around her, she screamed, clutching her chest as glowing lines spread across her skin. Mark reached her, pulling her away from the machine. But the floor split open beneath them, showing a massive pit of light and moving symbols. It was as if the planet itself was waking up. The relic spoke, not in words, but in a deep voice inside Mark's head. "The Star Child has returned," Mark stumbled back. Terrified, Lyra's body floated slightly off the ground, her hair and eyes glowing like fire and water mixed. The soldiers screamed, some running, some shooting blindly. Every weapon failed instantly. Metal melted, energy turned to smoke. Mark covered his face from the blinding light, shouting, "Lyra, stop!" But she couldn't hear him. Her voice echoed through the ruins, soft but powerful. "They called me a weapon. They were wrong. I am the memory of the stars." The relic exploded in white light. When the dust settled, every soldier was gone, vanished like shadows. Only Mark and Lyra remained. The ruin silent again. Lyra stood weakly, her body glowing softly now. Mark looked at her, eyes wide. "What did you do?" She looked down at her hands, shaking. "I didn't do anything, sir. It woke up by itself." Mark stared at the glowing walls, now humming softly. Whatever the relic was, it was alive, and now it was awake. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, kid. We're not safe here anymore." She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "I'm scared, Mark." He smiled faintly. "Even through the fear, so am I," he said. "But we'll face it together." And as they walked out of the glowing ruins into the dying light of day, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the world had just changed forever. And it all began with one small alien girl who simply said, "You look tired, sir." The wind howled softly across the desert ruins, carrying dust and broken whispers of ancient power. Mark and Lyra stood in silence, the ground beneath them still warm from the blast. The air shimmered faintly with energy, and every few seconds, a strange sound came from deep below, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to any living thing. Mark held Lyra's hand tightly, afraid she might collapse again. Her small body still glowed faintly with silver light, but her face was pale and weak. "You need rest," he said quietly, helping her sit by a broken pillar. Lyra shook her head, her voice soft and distant. "It's still awake, Mark. I can feel it calling." Mark looked at the ruined chamber behind them. Half of it was destroyed, yet the glowing lines on the walls still moved slowly, like veins of light under skin. "What is that thing?" he asked, mostly to himself. Lyra looked down at her hands. "They called it a relic, but it's not just a machine. It remembers." "Remembers what?" The stars, she whispered, and the ones who made it. Her words sent a cold shiver through him. Mark didn't understand alien technology, but he knew danger when he saw it. Whatever she had awakened, it wasn't meant for humans, maybe not even for the living. He sighed, looking at her worriedly. Then we leave. Before more soldiers come. Lyra hesitated, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon. They'll find us again, sir. The relic sent out a signal. Someone will answer. Mark frowned. Someone? You mean them? No, she said quietly, not them. Someone older. That made Mark's stomach tighten. Older than them? He muttered. Great. Just what we need. He helped her stand and led her out of the ruins. The desert stretched before them, endless and empty. But now the sand itself seemed alive. Tiny sparks of light danced where her feet touched. They walked for hours. The twin suns slowly setting. Mark's body ached. But he didn't stop every now and then. Lyra would look back, her eyes distant. What's wrong? He asked once. I hear voices, she said softly, like songs from far away. They say the Keeper has returned. Mark frowned. You think they mean you? She nodded slowly. Yes. By the time night came, they reached a small canyon with old wreckage scattered around. Broken ships. Ancient metal skeletons. Mark found a small cave to hide in and built a fire. He gave Lyra some water and wrapped her in his jacket. She looked at him and smiled faintly. You're kind, sir. He chuckled. Don't get used to it. I'm just too tired to argue. For a moment, they both laughed softly. The first real laugh since the chaos began. But their peace didn't last long. The ground shook suddenly, sending tiny rocks falling from the ceiling. Mark stood up, grabbing his pistol. What now? He muttered. Outside, the sky turned deep red, filled with strange glowing clouds moving like waves. The air vibrated with a low hum that made his skin crawl. Lyra stepped out of the cave, her silver eyes glowing brighter. It's the signal, she said. They heard it. Mark followed her, staring at the strange lights above. What's coming? Before she could answer, a beam of white light struck the desert floor in the distance. Out of it rose a massive, elegant structure, floating, silent, shining like glass and lightning combined. Mark's jaw dropped. Is that a ship? Lyra nodded, her voice trembling. It's not human. It's from the old ones. Old ones? He repeated. What are you talking about? She looked at him, her expression filled with both awe and fear. They made my people long ago. We were meant to guard their relics, not awaken them. Mark's heart pounded. Then we need to hide now. But before they could move, a deep voice echoed across the desert, not through sound, but through their minds. Child of the veil, why have you awakened the heart? Lyra froze, her eyes glowing white now. I didn't mean to, she whispered, trembling. I was scared. They forced me. The voice grew softer, but closer. Fear leads to light, little one. The stars remember those who seek hope. Mark looked around wildly. Who's there? Show yourself! The light around them shimmered, and a tall, golden figure appeared, made of energy, not flesh. Its form flickered like fire in the wind. It looked down at Lyra with something like sorrow. You were not ready, Keeper, it said. But the chain has already begun. Lyra's voice shook. What chain? The awakening of the relic has started a signal across the stars. Others will come, for you, for the human. For what lies buried. Mark stepped forward, fists clenched. If anyone tries to take her again, they'll have to go through me. The figure turned its glowing eyes toward him. Bravery from a mortal, rare but costly. Protect her well, human, for she carries the memory of worlds. The figure faded slowly into light, leaving behind a quiet hum in the air. Mark stood frozen. Trying to make sense of what just happened, Lyra looked at him, her face pale. Mark, I think I'm not just a child, she said softly. I think I'm part of something much older. He stared at her, his voice low. I don't care what you are, kid. You're still you, and you're still my responsibility. She smiled weakly, her eyes shining with tears. Then we face it together? He nodded firmly. Together. As they turned back toward the horizon, the red sky began to fade into dark blue. But behind them, far in the distance, the giant ship started to move, its lights blinking like stars preparing to descend. Mark didn't look back. He just held Lyra's hand tighter because he knew, whatever was coming next, it wasn't just about her anymore, it was about humanity. The stars, and something awakening that had been asleep for ages. The night was colder than ever on Vera 9. The wind carried the smell of dust, metal, and something heavier, fear. Mark and Lyra had found shelter in the remains of an old human outpost. Half buried in sand and time, the walls were cracked, the floors covered in dry rust, but it was the only safe place left for them. Mark worked quickly, checking the last of his weapons, an old plasma pistol, a few grenades, and a broken rifle he had repaired using scrap. Lyra sat near the wall, her glowing eyes dim now, her energy nearly drained. He looked at her and sighed. "You should rest." She shook her head. "They're coming. I can feel their machines moving underground." Mark froze for a moment, staring at her. "Underground?" She nodded slowly. "They learned from before. They're hiding from the ship above." Outside, faint tremors ran through the ground. The sky glowed red once again. 3 military carriers approaching from the south. "They found us faster than I thought," Mark muttered. Gripping his gun, he turned to Lyra. "Listen. No matter what happens, you run if I tell you to." But she just looked at him with calm sadness. "You already told me that last time." "I didn't run then, and I won't run now," Mark smiled weakly. "Stubborn little alien." She tilted her head. "Learned it from a human." Before either could speak again, a blinding light cut across the desert. The first carrier opened fire, plasma bolts striking the outpost. The walls shook violently, sand falling from the ceiling. Mark grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her behind the control console, shouting over the noise. "Stay low!" The sound was deafening. Flames spread through the broken structure as metal beams bent under the heat. Mark fired back through a shattered window, hitting one of the drones flying near the carriers. It exploded in a burst of blue sparks lighting up the sky. But for every drone he destroyed, 2 more appeared. Lyra pressed her hands over her ears, tears in her glowing eyes. "Stop! They're hurting the planet." Mark turned to her. "Lyra, it's just—" But before he could finish, the ground cracked open beneath them. Huge mechanical walkers rose from the sand, metal giants with long arms and glowing red eyes. Mark's face turned pale. "Mechs, big ones. They fired beams that turned sand into glass." Mark grabbed Lyra and pulled her behind a large pillar. "We can't fight them," he said, breathing hard. "Not like this." Lyra looked at him, her small hands shaking. "There's another way." She stepped out from behind the pillar before he could stop her. "Lyra!" he shouted. She raised her arms, her silver light glowing brighter. The air around her rippled like waves in water. The mechs stopped, their weapons flickering, then one by one. Their red eyes turned blue. The soldiers inside the carriers shouted orders, trying to override control. But the machines no longer listened to them. They turned, facing the sky as if waiting for a command. Lyra's voice echoed softly through the storm. "No more killing." The soldiers fired anyway, beams of light cutting through the air toward her. Mark ran forward, pushing her down just in time. The blast hit the wall behind them, throwing dust and smoke everywhere. He coughed, his arm bleeding. "Kid, you've got to stop." But she shook her head, tears running down her glowing cheeks. "I'm not strong enough alone." Mark looked at her, understanding in his tired eyes. "Then you won't be alone." He stood up, facing the battlefield, his voice rough but firm. "You want her?" He shouted toward the soldiers. "You'll have to go through me." The soldiers advanced, their boots heavy on the sand. Blaster fire filled the night again. Mark ran between the ruins, firing back, every shot burning with fury. He knew he couldn't win, but he also knew he couldn't stop. Behind him, Lyra pressed her hands together, focusing her last strength. Her body glowed brighter than ever before. The ground shook violently, and the desert seemed to awaken. Sand rose like a wave, forming shapes, giant creatures made of light and dust. They moved toward the carriers, slamming into them with silent force. The ships exploded in bright arcs across the sky. The soldiers screamed as the ground swallowed their machines. Mark shielded his eyes from the blinding light. When it faded, all that remained was silence. Burning wrecks and drifting sand, Lyra fell to her knees. Exhausted, her glow fading, Mark rushed to her, catching her before she hit the ground. Hey, easy," he said softly. "You did it." She looked up at him weakly. "They're gone, sir." He smiled faintly, brushing the dust from her hair. "Yeah, they're gone. You saved us." She blinked slowly, whispering, "No, we saved them too." The planet's heartbeat is calm again. Mark looked around. The sand shimmered faintly. Peaceful now, even the wind had gone still. as if the planet itself was breathing quietly again. He looked down at her and whispered, "You're something else, kid." She smiled softly. "So are you, sir." As the night grew quiet, the golden light of dawn began to rise again over Vera 9. In the distance, the great alien ship hovered silently, its lights slowly dimming as if bowing in respect. Mark watched it for a long moment and then looked at Lyra. "Guess that's over," he said, his voice calm but uncertain. Lyra shook her head gently. "No, sir. That was only the beginning." Mark frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked toward the horizon, her eyes faintly glowing again. When the relic awoke, it sent a signal farther than this galaxy. "They will come, both friend and enemy." He sighed, half smiling. "Figures. Can't even get a break." She giggled weakly. "You'll protect me again?" He nodded firmly. "Always." And as the sun rose higher, painting the desert gold, Mark stood beside her, knowing this moment of peace wouldn't last, but for now, the tired human and the small alien girl had won their fight. Against armies, against fear, against fate itself. The first rays of dawn broke over the endless sands of Vera 9. The red sky turned golden, and the wind carried a soft hum that felt alive. The battle was over, the air calm again. Smoke from the fallen ships drifted slowly into the light, and among the ruins stood a man and a child. A human and a little alien girl whose glow had changed the world. Mark sat beside Lyra near the edge of a broken dune. He was tired, his uniform torn, his hands rough with burns, but for the first time in years he felt peace. Lyra rested her head against his shoulder, half asleep, her silver eyes dim but calm. He smiled faintly, whispering, "You did good, kid. Better than anyone ever could." She murmured softly, "You didn't leave me. You stayed." He looked at her with gentle eyes. "Told you I don't break promises." The morning light touched the desert, turning the broken machines into mirrors. The once dead sand now shimmered faintly. Tiny green sprouts were growing between the cracks of glass soil. Mark stared in disbelief. "Is that plants?" Lyra smiled weakly. "The relic healed the land. It woke up the planet's heart again." He laughed softly. "You're telling me you fixed an entire world?" She giggled faintly. "We fixed it, but their peace didn't last long." A low hum echoed across the horizon. Deeper than thunder, Mark stood quickly, grabbing his rifle from the sky. A golden beam descended, slow, steady, and silent. Out of it emerged a smaller ship, beautiful and strange, like a living creature made of light. Lyra's eyes widened. "They're here." "Who?" Mark asked, ready to fight again. She shook her head. "Not soldiers. Guardians." The ship landed softly on the sand, its surface flowing like water. From its center stepped 3 tall beings made of light and silver mist. They looked neither solid nor ghostly. Something between. Their voices echoed in Mark's mind, calm and melodic. "Child of the Veil, we felt your call. The heart of the stars has awakened once more." Lyra stepped forward, her body glowing faintly again. She bowed her head. "I didn't mean to call you. I was only trying to survive." The tallest guardian nodded slowly. "Even so, your awakening has restored what was lost." He turned his glowing eyes toward Mark. "And you, human, your courage is written in the song of this world now." Mark frowned, slightly confused. "I didn't do anything special. I just protected her." The guardian's light flickered, almost like a smile. "To protect one life is to protect all life. You gave what we had forgotten. Choice, compassion, and defiance." Lyra looked up, tears in her eyes. "Will you take me away now?" The guardian tilted his head. "If that is your wish." She hesitated, then looked at Mark. "I don't want to leave him. He's my home now." Mark blinked, surprised by her words. He knelt down, smiling softly. "Hey, I don't belong in your kind of world, Lyra. I'm just a broken man with an old truck." She shook her head firmly. "You fixed me, sir. That makes you part of my world." The guardians were silent for a long moment, then the tallest one said gently, "Then stay, both of you. The heart has chosen its keepers." A warm light surrounded them. The sand beneath their feet turned clear like crystal. In the distance, the ruins began to rebuild themselves. Piece by piece, the relic pulsed once more. Slow, peaceful, alive. Mark looked around in awe. "What's happening?" Lyra smiled. "It's starting again. The planet's waking up for real this time." He looked at her with a proud grin. "Guess we started something big, huh?" She laughed softly. big enough for both humans and aliens. As the Guardians faded back into the ship, one of them spoke once more. Guard this world, human, and teach her the meaning of your strange word, hope. Then the ship rose slowly and vanished into the sky, leaving only silence and light behind. Mark and Lyra stood together, watching the twin suns rise higher. The desert, once empty and lifeless, now shimmered with color. Water began to glisten between dunes, and the air carried the faint song of new life. Days passed, then weeks. Mark repaired what was left of the outpost and turned it into a small home. He built tools, planted seeds, and taught Lyra how to fix machines. In return, she taught him how to listen to the ground, to the wind, to the stars. Sometimes at night, they would sit outside under the glowing moons. Lyra would whisper, "You look tired, sir," and he'd laugh every time, replying, "You never change, do you?" But one night, months later, as the wind whispered softly through the canyons, Lyra stood outside, her silver eyes looking at the sky. Mark walked up beside her. "What's on your mind?" She smiled faintly. "I hear the stars again. They're singing your name too now." He laughed quietly. "Hope they can carry a tune." She giggled, resting her head on his arm. "They say humans are strange, but they make miracles happen." Mark looked at the horizon, feeling the warmth of a world reborn. He never thought a tired mechanic on a lonely planet would find family in a lost alien child. But fate had written something different together. They had faced soldiers, machines, and even gods, and somehow they had won not by strength, but by heart. As the dawn rose again, painting the world gold, Mark whispered softly, "Welcome home, kid." And far above them, the stars shimmered brighter, as if the universe itself had paused to listen to two small lives who had changed everything by simply choosing to care.